Okay, so one of the things that Grant requested yesterday is we actually start off just a conversation amongst the group. You know, maybe has anyone got like a key insight or a key message that you've got out of the weekend that you wanted to highlight, or a topic that you think maybe everyone in the group would, or not everyone, but you know, several people in the group might be able to contribute to, rather than just answering a single question at a time. It's something that's kind of more broader for the whole group. So anyone want to start that conversation?
I just have something to say. I again, as I told Emma, just found her talk delightful, and Kate's yesterday. And there are so many amazing people in the world working in the same arena that we are from different perspectives. And I'm really hoping that we can continue to reach out and make those connections and do this work together and share knowledge that others are learning, and how can we incorporate that, and vice versa. So that's my take home and my wish going forward, and my continued work.
I'd like to thank everyone today for their presentations. It's really been amazing to see some of the work in the different types of problems that we actually are able to solve. It's very good to see that the individuals who are here today have the passion, and yeah.
Well, maybe I can start a topic. So Julien, you got a few questions around the fungus that's underlying the mechanism around manipulation. Seems to have some similarities around the fungus that contributes to ribosomal voices and cording and tribal block. You want to talk a little bit around, you know, does the silent mind actually help get rid of manipulation? Or, you know, what's the differences between those? And a number of other people could talk about that too.
I answered some of those. So no, when you do the silent mind process and you get rid of the Borg and all of those ribosomal voices and the cording and tribal block, it doesn't impact the manipulation fungus mechanism. So you still can be manipulated by those fungus. So it's two separate issues. But we know that people can manipulate others with cording, because there is a sense of the abuser and the victim, always a sense of superiority in the cording sometimes. But it's different because you don't sense like the presence of someone near you, like like impacting you and making you behave differently. And so it's different mechanisms, and there is this sense of a presence that is very noticeable. And if you are able to sense nausea, it's also a sign that could be a manipulation fungus. I don't know if that's answered the question, but that kind of a resume.
Okay, thanks. I've got, I think there's a couple of people asking for around this. So people love the example that Emma gave around, you know, Nancy sharing in that death experience. So people are asking, you know, curious to know what would be the Institute's perspective. How would our model explain that type of experience around, you know, seeing the soul emerge and communicating from an ISPS model perspective?
We already have an explanation for that, right?
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, we are just, when people are dying, they experience the structure in the cell. So maybe they access some other realm or some structure that give them access to other realm. That's my perception. That's what I know, and I was reading about this subject because I was interested with near-death experience. I'm like, what is it with seeing all your life and talking to your loved one and stuff like that? So I don't have this explanation for this aspect with the souls and stuff like that, but I think we are still in the cell, but just exploring other realms. So
Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm interested in Grant's perspective.
I'm a little reluctant to talk just because I don't want to shut down dialogue from other people. That's why we're having these conferences. I get tired of hearing myself speak. Emma, do you want to say anything on that topic?
You're on mute, Emma.
Shayne suggested that you're looking for an ISPS perspective, and I just don't know enough to say. And so I'm also one that would love to hear from those who are in ISPS what the perspective would be, because I really can't answer it. But if we change the question around a little bit, maybe it's something I can answer if it's not about the authority of ISPS.
I'm happy for you to change the question a little bit to be able to contribute to the conversation as well, Emma.
Me too.
But I think everyone's also going to expect the ISPS expert to contribute to the conversation as well, Grant.
Okay, after.
Yes, Emma?
So how would the question be changed then?
I thought you had an idea on that. Well, maybe what it is, so you've spent a lot of time studying with Brazil, indigenous cultures, and I guess a lot of other spiritual practices. What are some of the explanations that other cultures or organizations would have for that kind of experience?
Oh, okay. That's an interesting question. So, and broad, very broad. So, from the perspective of yogic philosophy in particular, I would say the soul resides in the system, and I don't know even how you perceive of the soul itself. That may be something that is not named or named in a very different way from your perspective. But from my perspective and yogic philosophy, the soul resides in the body and comes into the body at conception, and then leaves the body at death. And so the body is just simply an envelope for us, and it can be perceived by medical intuitives and people who are highly intuitive at conception as well as at death. And there is a transition that goes on where the soul goes actually back to, let's say, how should we call it? back to the realm of God. So, and I'm very happy to call that all kinds of different things, but God usually works for most people. And the spirit then, as a soul, is in a zone where they can continue to learn and grow towards this higher awareness, both in between lives as well as in life itself. Is that answering the question for you enough?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Try to keep it simple.
Yeah.
So a question then, Emma. So near-death experience, it's like the soul come back to the realm of God, and then come back, and then come back in the body again. And okay.
Yes. And can remember some of what they experienced. Yeah.
And also people describe that they are seeing their deathbed and like floating around, and when they come back, so there is like they were out somewhere and then they came back, they see themselves, then they re-enter their body. So that would match your explanation also.
Yes, and sometimes they can report things like, seeing a sneaker outside the window on 3 levels up in the place where they were having surgery. So how could they possibly have seen it if they were never even up in that area of the hospital?
Along those lines, it turns out you can define trauma as a memory with an out-of-body experience. So it isn't just a near-death experiences, but rather severe trauma does that too. So you can see stuff that you shouldn't be able to see. And I didn't even realize this was going on with trauma. I actually had someone tell me about it and say, this defines trauma. And I went, holy shit, you're right. All these really horrible experiences, I'm seeing it like TV. And so it's not unique. You don't actually have to die to have that. All you have to do is think about some really shitty things in your life, and boom, you've got viewpoints that don't make any sense conventionally. Yeah. Maybe, should I? Yeah, cool. So just so you know my orientation, I'm a real hardcore engineering, medical kind of orientation person. And for me, a lot of the stuff that I studied was pretty woo-woo, especially in California back in the 70s and 80s. And Emma's smiling because she probably had the same experience. So each time I encountered something that I hadn't believed in before, it had to push my worldview out a little further. One of them happened in 2004, I think it was. I had just left my sister. We'd been visiting, and I drove away to give a class. And so I was standing in front of a whiteboard, and I was just going away in my lecture. And all of a sudden, grief just overwhelmed me, and tears started pouring out of my eyes, and I couldn't speak. My throat was so closed with sobbing, and I had absolutely no idea why. I'm just standing there at the blackboard going, what the hell just happened? And it turned out about 20 minutes later, my uncle calls and said my sister had been killed in a car accident the moment that that grief started. I hadn't even been, just no idea. So I turned around and drove back to my sister's home. And I found something really surprising, or actually unbelievable to me. I could sense my sister. And not only could I sense her, I could hear her, a bit like the woman in Emma's talk. And it wasn't indistinct. It was like my sister was standing there and talking to me. And she was really concerned, guess what, about her husband, who was really poor at financial matters. It turned out that my sister was the one who did all the financial stuff, and she hadn't been intending to have a car accident and die. In fact, she just found out that she could have a child, and she was really excited about that. Just a tragedy. But at any rate, so for the next couple of days, she just started telling me, okay, you need to get him to sign this paper, and you got to do that. And I mean, it was tedious lawyer stuff, from a person who wasn't even there anymore. And it was particularly interesting too, because when I kind of perceived her, it was a bit of a disc with her body image in the disc. So I didn't know what was going on, but I went with it, and then I noticed after a few more days that this disc and the sharp awareness of my sister started to expand and get more diffuse. And what she talked about started to change. Before, she was concerned about her wife and her husband and making sure all the finances were done so they wouldn't lose their property and all that. And then she started to lose interest in her life and stuff around her. And as this ball diffused, or this something that I was seeing got more expanded, it got more diffuse, and it corresponded to her lack of, you could say, attention or focus or interest in the world. And it took about 10 days, maybe a little longer, but it had diffused so much that she was basically gone. And then she was completely gone. So this is a very strong personal experience, and yet I'm going, what the hell is that about, right? Because the engineering and the medical side came in. Well, I didn't understand it for many years. And it turned out that what that was about is that awareness itself, something we call the center of awareness, which you can identify kinesthetically, is actually a substance. So our consciousness is a substance. You could think of it as a substance that has the intrinsic property of self-awareness. And this stuff is formed at the beginning of the primordial germ cells while you're in your grandma, when the egg and sperm are formed. And it's a substance. It's an actual physical substance. And for most people, it is kind of a grayish or translucent or transparent blob. Okay. Well, it turns out there's disorders of consciousness with that material, and it turned out that you have to fix it to fix some certain problems. But that's a different issue. As far as my sister goes, what happened was that blob of consciousness that we all have, and sometimes more than one, a male part and a female part, for example, that blob of consciousness didn't disappear when she died. So as far as she was concerned, she'd had a horrible accident and it felt like crap when her car got crushed. And yet she didn't disappear. She was still there from her own perception. It matched the biology in that that blob was still functional, even if it was, submicroscopic. And that sense of diffusion that I experienced both in her personality and visually was that blob starting to fall apart and dissolve over time. And that sort of matches some of the Buddhist teachings about how long it takes for a person to basically die after, to fade away after they die. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but certainly that explains certain things. It turns out that particular blob of awareness, depending on the person, can actually hang around a lot longer if the person has a huge motivation to stay present in the world. But it can last a long time. For example, say you're a parent and you're really worried about the health of your children. Maybe they're sick and you died unexpectedly. You might last a lot longer to try and help. The problem is, just like we were talking about the out-of-body experience, you're out of body. You have no body to work with. You're just a disembodied awareness that can sort of transport itself around, but you really can't interact with the real world unless you are lucky enough to speak to someone like myself who could actually interact and communicate with that sort of thing. Again, that's pretty woo-woo, and if it hadn't happened to me, I'd be really skeptical. But my sister was telling me stuff that I had no idea was going on in their finances and what I should do about it. So very convincing. And then to find out that there was a biological basis, and a biological basis that could be damaged and that it needed repair and gave psychological issues and stuff on top of that, became much more exciting. It turned out that there's some really key peak states, one of them being the beauty way, involving directly with that material. It has to fuse, the male and female blobs have to become a new thing, just like Emma's slide with the caterpillar and a butterfly. The two have to come together and form a new kind of material to really have the beauty way. So it all sort of tied together. Did that answer the question? There's more, but I figured that's enough woo-woo for today, maybe.
I think that got to the core of the question.
Yeah, I think that was great. And I found fascinating because I know, working with the Institute and teaching and people, what is the soul? And because we don't use that terminology, I've wondered, I don't know. So Emma, I found it extraordinarily fascinating that you said that these medical intuitives can see the soul starting at conception and leaving at death. And I went, oh my gosh, it's the COA, which is what Grant's talking about. And at conception, the COA material that is present in the egg and the sperm, as he said, come together and form something new. And that may well be what other people are talking about when they talk about the soul. And it resides in the body from that time on and until, Grant said, until a little bit after birth. I'm just wondering, when Adam died, Grant, how long did he hang around?
Well, this is pushing the boundary of what's believable. Are you sure you want me to talk about that?
I do. I don't know about anybody else.
We had a colleague who was really an amazing human being, talk about peak states and motivation for changing humanity for the better. He died unexpectedly of a heart attack around 2006. And like my sister, suddenly he's out of body. And like my sister, I can hear him, right? It turned out that he didn't go away for at least a year. And in fact, he wanted to continue the humanity project and the research. So basically, as far as he was concerned, it just made communication easier, because now he could sort of teleport around in a certain way. Back in those days, the internet was still kind of iffy and phones were expensive and all that sort of stuff. So although he did ask for a 2-week vacation after he died, just so he could go around the world, because he'd been so busy. He was a physician, a surgeon. He'd been so busy, he never really had the chance to go to Chichen Itza or any of those other places. So he took a 2-week vacation and then just came back to work. But he did tell me that being dead didn't make him any smarter, and which was pretty interesting. But yeah, he lasted for about a year, maybe a year and a half. But he finally said, you know, aside from just a few people, I can't talk to anyone. I can't interact with the world, and our research isn't moving forward as fast as I'd like, and it's effort to stay present. And he just sort of turned off the effort, and pretty quickly he diffused away and was gone.
So even though he was not there anymore, he wasn't able to get new perception or new insight for the research, being the other side.
No, it didn't work that way. Yeah, I mean, he was really smart, and oddly enough, he stayed smart. And you know, the discoveries we made, but no, he didn't get some sort of magical solution to the problems, which was a shame. It would have been so useful, but.
I haven't personally experienced this, but if I remember from the readings, that also matches what Emma was talking around the conception, and not only there, in our model, that would be considered what we call a key developmental event. And from what I recall, at those key developmental events, quite often there's the experience of a white light coming into the body at the time. I'm certain that's what happens at conception. Is that right?
Remember? We're not sure what's going on. People do describe exactly what you're saying. I'm not sure what that is. I'm suspicious it's a fungal interaction, but I just don't know.
Yep.
But there's a bunch of events where there's a white light comes in, but again, we need to investigate. We sort of dropped that investigation because we're really hot on other things, solving more, you know, fundamental issues.
Yeah, we're definitely focused on fundamental issues and finding the, I mean, I don't know how much we should talk, but I find it fascinating, the fusion of male and female awareness in conception has seemingly detrimental consequences for how you experience the world, and probably underlies how the world is, you can say some people are able to do some of the things that you talk about, Emma, about perceiving, and others it's totally bogus. It's not something that is real, and probably because I think it might need some kind of, that material has a quality that needs to have a certain, I don't know, it gets different when they merge, and that gives you more abilities to do things, I think. And I think that might be why the world is like, no, it's not real, and other people say it's really real. So it divides people into who can do this and who have absolutely, I mean, and can't, I mean, you can't even, when you don't have the ability, it's like grabbing an air and it's not existing. By the way, Emma, I really want to thank you for bringing this, the awareness into the world of these different episodes that you can have from entering these different states or partial states or anything, to kind of make it not so stigmatic, or, you know, that it's actually part of our biology. It's kind of what we try to do also in our work.
Well,
thanks.
Thank you. It can be challenging to bring something that is not well accepted into the zone. But I wanted to mention that the Spiritists of Brazil, they are totally dedicated to the concept of spiritual evolution, and do believe that we are essentially souls moving in and out of bodies. And they have a concept called the perispirit, which is actually, I think, the blob that we were talking about. containing both the full potential for male and female. But so the perispirit actually comes into the system at birth. And it's the perispirit that's the bridge between the soul and the biology. And it's the perispirit that actually holds the possibility of the blueprint of the whole system. And it's out of that perispirit that the body grows. So it literally contains the physical blueprint for the body. And part of that is, and this may be too woo-woo for the group, but I'm just going for it because I was asked for my perception and my knowledge of Spiritism. So there are 50 Spiritist psychiatric hospitals in Brazil. And as I mentioned, there are 13,000 Spiritist community centers, and about 20 to 40 million people in Brazil follow what's going on with Spiritism. So this is not just some, small sect that is off in the jungle. In fact, they don't consider themselves of the indigenous population, but I think it's the popularity of it in Brazil is because there has been intermarriage with the indigenous cultures as well as with the people who came over as slaves to Brazil. So they were all spiritualists, which is different. But anyway, it might be of great interest to both of you or to all of you to look into this concept of the perispirit, because it is thought of as being semi-material and difficult to measure, but still semi-material, and there at conception and leaves at death. So it's a little bit more formal than blob, although blob works.
It's a visual metaphor, visual perception. Yeah.
Yes, I understand.
So for them, the perisphere is a blueprint. It's not the soul, right? So you said it's like the link between the body and the soul, or is it the soul for them?
No, it's the link. It's the bridge. Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting data that maybe reinforces that. As you get a peak state, you can see the blob material change. And a normal person, the blob is just kind of uniformly blobby, but the peak states can be seen as a more defined area in the blob. Smaller, but so perhaps it matches what you're saying, that somehow that blueprint matches somehow with the center of awareness. Just normal people just don't have really high functioning states.
Yeah, I think although I don't know your vocabulary so much, I have to guess quite a bit. I'm sorry about that. I'm still ignorant with it, but I just wanted to say that within this way of looking at things, there are some people who can perceive the perispirit and what is in the perispirit, and literally there may be what's called a miasm there, which can then become materialized literally as illness. So then it becomes important to be able to see the miasm so that one can prevent the disease from coming forward, but that can generally only be seen by highly trained medical intuitives, but it's possible. And I just wanted to say there is a difference between seeing the perispirit and seeing the soul. And the soul actually, from this perspective, if let's say the soul is out of the body, the soul can come back and interact with beings infinity toward, it's not oriented just to 10 days. And I have great respect for Buddhism. I was a Buddhist tried and true for a period of time in Zen Buddhism in the late 60s and early 70s. And I wondered about this, and actually Suzuki Roshi performed the funeral of my mother. And I was quite close to Suzuki at the time. And we asked, where did she go? Where did she go? This was in 1970. And he said, well, she's become part of everything. In other words, she's kind of dissolved, just as you were saying. It's a dissolution process. But then I started looking at Tibetan Buddhism, and they talk about the soul going through a passageway where there are hungry ghosts and spirits who are still dissatisfied. And then of course in Spiritism, there's a strong belief that the spirit goes on. And so I've kind of come over to that zone, to that territory.
This roundtable is going in a direction I did not anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to bring up the question for the group. We're talking about basically woo stuff that's way outside of normal biomedical kind of discourse. And we're trying to move our primary cell and our psychoimmunology and work with diseases into the mainstream. Do you think talking about this in a public setting is actually a mistake, or how do you guys feel about it? I'd be curious about your responses.
Well, I have a response, of course. And no, Grant, already what we do is probably kind of considered woo-woo. So just saying. And just maybe close the discussion on Spiritism, which I've never heard about that term or that group. So I'm quite interested in this. And for me, it's like, okay, how does this fit into our model? And because we want our model to incorporate all, phenomenon that are we aware of. So now we have the sense of the perispirit and the soul and these various conversations. So I'm quite intrigued by that. But I think, to get back to the question you're asking, Grant, as a physician and having been trained and in that model in conventional medicine, I think if you look at, let's say, the American Medical Association, or that the persona of doctors out there, and many physicians, I think, identify with that, it is pretty mainstream. It's woo-woo. They kind of have the party line. When you talk to doctors individually, off the record and not, for public discourse, first of all, some of them have had these experiences, have no framework, don't know what to do with it. And sometimes they're like, so thankful to talk to someone who's willing to open up those questions. So I think medicine and probably psychology as well are operating on those two levels. The personal, okay, I have to keep this hidden and, nod to Wilfred, maybe be ashamed of these weird things are happening to me. I don't know what to do about it. And having to have this very professional, white coat kind of persona. So how they're perceived is changed. So I think it's healthy to do this. So.
Yeah, for me, when I was hearing Emma, I love hearing that because it makes sense with some past experiences and people telling me that, or client. Also, I'm like, okay, so how does that fit in our model? So now I want to do research on what she said, because I want to understand that and what can we do with that? How can we maybe help us or help others with this new information, with our psychobiology and psychoimmunology, especially with the diseases she was talking about. You can see in it. It makes sense with our model already. So I'm like, interesting. So for me, it's interesting in this sense also.
So what you're saying is, as long as we focus on the idea that what we're working with is a biological model that can explain these phenomenon, it bridges the two. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah. That's why for me it's so important and crucial, because most people are not aware of this biology. Maybe more now, because we are doing Symposium every year to bring that forward and make it more known that there is a biology basis for spiritual experiences or phenomenon. So talking about that will help people to make them fit, I understand that. So now maybe you can bridge that to what you are saying, because you have an understanding of that. So yes, for me at least.
so I think what I was trying to do with my talk yesterday was actually to say, okay, we work with these things, we call them whatever we call them, but we work with them in a way that is unifying, but it also has a methodology that is, I mean, it has the engineering perspective of things, so that we try to make things work very effectively, and we need to understand things, which is different than many other. Like I said, I wouldn't compare us to alternative therapies or medicine, because we have that. Have that model, have that perspective of engineering. And so the framework that we put all of this into, I think makes it, I mean, you can't avoid that people will think whatever they think of what, you know, these things, that it's woo-woo or, but I think that is different because we do it that way. So whether people can see that or not, that's a total different question, because I mean, just hearing about it, I would, as a medical, also probably, if I didn't know enough about it, be very skeptical, just because there is so much out there that's.
Yeah, I'm skeptical.
Yeah. So I mean, we're doing this because I think all of us believe in the reason of doing it, and also in that it's effective.
Yeah.
And I think the effectiveness is a good driver for our work. You know, if it works, it works. Yeah. And we do it in as safe as, you know, we test our things. And
anyone else?
I was going to have a similar response to Kirsten. For me, like you, Grant, engineering background, the number one thing I'm most interested in is that it works, right? And so if educating people around spiritual emergence and emergency means that actually helps them become healthier and continue to develop their consciousness, that's part of our holistic model. So I think when I talk about our work, I'm never trying to convince someone that they should believe this, right? In our training, we tell our students, don't believe a word we say, right? Experience this for yourself. Get to have a direct experience to see that it works, right? That's what it actually all comes down to. And it's the same with the spiritual emergence stuff. That's why we recommend people getting educated in that, because we know there are lots of clients that suffer from spiritual emergency without the guidance to actually work through that. So if our purpose is to heal humanity, then that includes helping people with spiritual emergency. So I'm all for it being integrated.
I'm just wondering, Emma, I have you right here, on this panel. Again, as a physician, and you know, when I went through the training, and one of the things that we do in the Institute for all our certified therapists is look at what's your backup. And one of the things is looking at who can help you if you have a spiritual emergency client. And so just calling around in my local environment, I mean, I couldn't find anyone. Well, I found one person here who knew about it. But my question is, in medical schools, in schools where they are teaching psychology, psychiatry, counseling, is there any movement forward as far as a class in spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency? Is this even being taught in the ivory towers, universities, et cetera, that you know of?
Well, it's very hard to measure, Mary, and to tell you the truth, I'm just don't have enough time to really look into that, because I'm basically, and I also have a private practice for consulting, and I'm working too hard. So it's a really good question. And I can't give you a good answer about it, but I can say, periodically I just Google spiritual emergence and emergency. And I am amazed at how much there is out there in terms of people offering help or offering definition. There are numerous Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. Well, I won't say about the LinkedIn groups, but certainly Facebook groups that people can join for help. But in terms of professionals, I've been, so I started IMHU in 2013, and there are more and more psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., coming to me around it. And because of the extreme interest, I'll call it, in psychedelics right now, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, people find that learning how to work with and support someone in spiritual emergence or someone in spiritual emergency dovetails completely with assisting and being a guide for someone who's doing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So we don't endorse anyone doing anything that's illegal. And a lot of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy that's going on these days is going on in the dark, as it were. But I team up with a physician, an MD, and we offer ketamine assisted psychotherapy, and I see the results of that. And so I think that more people will be coming to this actually because they say, wow, look at this. We're going to be seeing in the future a lot more psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. We want training. How can we get training? What are the components of the training? And there's an organization called Psychedelics Today that just started a year-long training for people who want to be guides. And they've asked me to be part of the training to help people with spiritual emergence and emergency. So I think part of it is people are beginning to agree that it's a good piece of both vocabulary, you know, to wrap your mind around some of the phenomena. And so it's coming of age.
All right, thank you.
On that
I
last
just
point.
looked it up.
Oh, sorry. How about you go, Julie?
The DSM-5 does have spiritual emergency as a psychological category. What they do with that, I don't know, as psychiatrists and psychologists, but it is in the manual now.
Is it? I thought it was two.
Would you illuminate that for me? Is that something that was just added, or because it hasn't been there before?
Well, just what I'm looking at now, DSM-4, religious and spiritual problems, spiritual emergencies and crises. Proposal for this new diagnostic category came from transpersonal clinicians concerned with the misdiagnosis and mistreatment of persons in the midst of spiritual crises.
Can you tell me what the date is for that edition?
So that is DSM-4, but DSM-5 is now out, and it's an article on PubMed.
I think they deleted it in 5.
Yeah, I think what you're reading was a recommendation, but not necessarily got implemented.
Okay.
I think that's a possibility as well. And not that I spend a lot of time reading the DSM-4 and 5, but
yeah, this is 2012, so it's old.
I think in what I remember, it was included in a religious and spiritual problem, but they were discussing the fact that if it's a pathology or if it's a life crisis. So, and all the point around this categorization is what it was more to not consider it as a pathology actually, and to make a differentiation with psychosis.
Yeah, because that's the problem, is that they do tend to look at it as psychosis and treat it medically.
And Emma, there was a question related to one of the last things you're saying around, psychedelics obviously is being studied a lot more now. Do you have any experience around of the spiritual emergencies that you become exposed to with clients around how much of that is induced with psychedelics versus non-psychedelics, or other ways that they might end up in a spiritual emergence crisis?
in other words, if we're looking at what are the catalysts of spiritual emergency and our psychedelics.
Yeah, kind of what proportion is psychedelics versus not psychedelics?
Yeah, there's a PhD fellow by the name of Steve Taylor who's written about this in a book called The Leap. He's a wonderful proponent of this kind of participant in this kind of discussion, because he did his PhD thesis on what are the catalysts for spiritual emergency, really. And he said that actually the major catalyst is stress, which really surprised me. In other words, like people in war, being under incredible stress and then having some amazing experience as they're fighting. So, but it can also be childhood trauma or various traumas that we have outside of war. And he said he expected psychedelics and the people doing psychedelics illegally, not with a psychotherapist who was proficient in guiding them. He thought that would be a major grouping, but it turned out that stress far outwins, statistically speaking.
While we're on this topic, and other people in the group I know can contribute to this as well. So Amy was asking around supporting people with Kundalini experiences. So not once they're at the end of the process, but actually more going through the journey of the traumas that might get triggered as they go through that. She was going to ask Wilfred around did he know anything around healing the shame might help with that, whether he had any experience of that. But does anyone else want to talk about things that support people going through some of the challenges of the Kundalini being activated?
I could speak to it, but I'd love to hear what other people are saying. And also I'm thinking about what Grant was saying, you get into this, what's called woo-woo stuff, right? That we get from Eastern psychology or Brazilian spiritism or whatever. And you cross into an area where there are more people who will really doubt your validity as scientists. So I'm feeling like I don't want to keep embroidering on these kinds of topics within the panel out of respect for what Grant was bringing up.
Well, it helps healing the whole manipulation fungus issue, not to worry about what other people are thinking. But I'll comment on from our perspective, because last year Julien and I did a presentation on the Kundalini issue, and from our perspective now, from Kundalini, from an energetic or a spiritual emergence, that I don't understand. So I'm interested on your perspective of that, Emma. For us, there's a lot of pathology in what's happening with Kundalini, and whether as a spiritual emergency, Kundalini awakening, and whatever spiritual growth and transformation is going to happen from that. From our perspective, often at that time there is a pathogen that gets triggered and causes a lot of the symptoms, and it's a huge issue for us because when it's active, all other healing, it's just hard to heal anything else. So last year when Julien and I presented, we were talking about what we've done to heal the toxin released by this pathogen, and interestingly, there's an emotional tone of that toxin, which is blame, is the huge issue. So we have, since last year, we've just, from a psychoimmunology perspective, started a process, or developed a process to totally clear that pathogen. Now, we've only been working with one of our clients, who interestingly was a client several years ago, and she had it triggered and was having tremendous problems from this. And she didn't think of it as Kundalini. She just had tremendous anxiety. She had problems with hot spots, just all kinds of problems. And when she used our body association technique and some other things, was able to get that pretty quiescent and not have any problems until it was re-triggered several months ago. And so we're pretty sure that that initial process of just working with the blame didn't get rid of it entirely. And so we've been working with her on actually clearing the pathogen. and again, the whole resistance and difficulty. And she's very, very good at healing, very intuitive. But it's interesting to watch her getting inaccurate information, which is the way that at an unconscious level, she's self-sabotaging herself. It's like, no, don't heal this. But we've worked through some of those issues and she's actually doing a lot better. So that's a very promising, as far as healing Kundalini from a pathological perspective. And in her case, Julien, you may want to add any more, but she initially had a huge spiritual awakening experience. And I think in healing this, it's going to allow her transformation just to bloom and blossom and not shut it down. So that's my perspective.
All right. Were you asking, Mary, from my perspective? And I'm not quite sure.
Yes.
As that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, my question is, if we I'm not a haven't done a deep dive into Kundalini except through our perspective, where I said we see the pathological problems with it, how it can cause. But as far as how that is, as a spiritual emergence and a transformation, how you would define that, and when people come through whatever they're coming through, how is that different, or is it, than any other spiritual emergence process that you are seeing? Was that clear at all?
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, oh, how do I do this in a very short period of time? So I'll say, Mary, first of all, that I think most of the literature that's out there on Kundalini is really wrong. It's extremely distorted.
Totally agree.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Grant. And a person that I feel is right on about Kundalini, doesn't say a whole lot about it, doesn't write treatises about it, but it's Yogananda. And he came from East India. He came from the tradition, and he had many superlative teachers. And he talks about Kundalini as rising as being a process with consciousness. And I think a lot of what's going on right now that people are calling Kundalini has to do with the need for their biological systems to open up. More similar to what Wilhelm Reich was talking about, that we actually block the biological system, and for consciousness to raise and for us to attain health, we have to unblock the biological system. So unfortunately, I have to beg innocence about what your philosophy is in ISPS about this. But my guess is that a lot of what people are struggling with, for instance, after they've had a big spiritual awakening experience, and then they say, I'm dealing with Kundalini, is actually they've tuned into how blocked their system is, and they don't know how to unblock it. And working with it biologically and bioenergetically can oftentimes be totally helpful and totally right on. Short answer.
Thank you.
That made you smile, Grant. I'm glad. Yeah. So I want to say my dad was a pathologist who taught at Harvard Medical School. So I have that still in my ear, as it were.
Yeah.
I also found with Kundalini, people like to have a meaning to it, to their experience, because a lot of them are suffering a lot of trauma are triggers. Sometimes they are like feeling amazing, they have good abilities, they have good perception, they feel amazing, and then they feel like very down, they blame themselves, they blame others. So that's Kundalini, that's always like a wave, like the snake energy, I say. So for me, it's more like, I think once the Kundalini is gone, they get like a sense of peak state, like a blissful feeling in their body. So I think that's maybe something that people want to reach out with Kundalini. So maybe there is a lot of truth in what people are saying about Kundalini, and there is also a lot of things that for me feels like more like they want to have a meaning to their suffering, so they find a nice aspect to their experience, to those experiences. Like, I need that to evolve. Or those trauma are here to make me a better person. And yes, I mean, if you heal all the time, all those triggers, you will be a better person because you heal a lot of stuff. But yeah, for me, it's just the meaning that they put on it. But my goal is just to help them with that, and so that's true partially for me.
And if I could just interrupt for a second, one of the most disturbing things about our work was to find how many psychoactive pathogens there were. That a lot of the stuff that people experience that we think of just mental stuff or mental illness actually had a biological basis that was pathogen driven. I had no idea that we would discover that, because I mean, this is unknown in the field. But yet, once you could start to see inside the cell, you could see how it was interacting with the cell to cause these effects. Shayne, I've got a question. Can we perhaps ask some of the other presenters to say what came up for the meetings for them, or any insights they have?
So one of the challenges with that is I actually want to be respectful of the time with Emma. So we told her that we were going to finish in a couple of minutes, and she has some other personal commitments as well. So I'm assuming, Emma, you need to leave in a couple of minutes. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you going to continue on? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's one of the options. I was going to explore that as a possibility.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So is there any final words that you want to say then, knowing that you need to go?
Just thank you so much. It's been a delight to get to know you a little bit. And my next step actually is to ask someone for help with a client of mine who has been diagnosed as schizoaffective. And I have a feeling that there's something biological going on. So I'd love to get some help with it. And thank you all. It's been a delight to just be introduced to what you're about. And I look forward to learning more. And thank you, Shayne, for inviting me.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure having you here. We feel very honored that you're able to join us as a speaker. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Very much.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so Grant, we can do what you suggested then. So does anyone else want to share some of the key insights or key messages? Julie, how about, there was one question here that you might have. So someone was asking around, it was specifically asking the Institute, but you might have some information from your experience as well around, has the Institute encountered any significant trauma caused by C-section births? Kind of related to the topic you were talking on, lots of other birth trauma.
I definitely believe that there's a physiological response caused by skipping some of the developmental processes that are caused with the pressure on the baby's body going through the vaginal canal, rather than being just removed and bypassing all that physical kind of touch and pressure. And I remember hearing years ago that people who'd been born by cesarean were more likely to struggle with getting things done. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what somebody said at the time. You're smiling, Kirsten. Do you know somebody who's okay?
It was yeah,
Pretty interesting.
pretty interesting connection there.
So yeah, so there's definitely physiological effects from not having the proper birth process and kind of bypassing it.
And anyone
Also not the
Okay.
cultural flora, but that's not the trauma part. The introduction to the gut canal or bacterial.
Has anyone got any observations around trauma healing around C-section that they've seen with any of their clients? No? Okay.
Oh, but I would take the chance to say thank you, Gili. Do I pronounce good your name? Sorry, how you say? Gili. For your talk, it was really amazing, and I was personally quite activated actually when you were talking about birth trauma, and I realized I still have things to go to observe there.
I'm sorry about that. I was aware that
it was interesting. It was amazing. Yeah, it was really amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
It helps that we've actually got techniques to deal with the trauma that gets triggered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I did so I have a 4-year daughter, as you maybe have seen just before, and I tried to do some healing before to give birth, to try to make it happen easily. It was not the case. It was 30 hours delivering. And I when I was doing this generational actually healing around birth, I realized how big and deep are those trauma and how many there are, because I did many sessions, and it was like there's no end. So yeah, there is a lot to do at that time, I think.
Yeah, I think we have so many ancestors who had birth trauma.
At the point, I really realized that I just touched this point that it's like a conditioning that we have to give birth with pain. And I touched it that it could be done just in 3 contractions with no pain. But it was not the case anyway. It was not fully healed.
Yeah. No, apparently so. The Buteyko breathing people, Buteyko is a Russian scientist who developed breath work based on pranayama. And he says that if you can physiologically balance the carbon dioxide ratio so that you have 60 seconds tolerance of carbon dioxide in your tissues, I can't explain it particularly well, then birth becomes pain-free. So he also spoke, and I spoke about this last year, that when you get to 40 seconds, illnesses are healed, but you also like exercise. And I got to the point where I was like 35, and one morning I wanted to exercise, and this is just like bizarre, you know, because I hate exercise, and I just really, it was just like, wow, I really want to exercise, I really want to get up and move. You know, and it tied in with doing those breathwork exercises. So I think
there's something there with the CO2-O2 ratio or something, because there's also something about the breathing through the for the fetus through the placenta, and then breathing through the mouth, and I don't know, there must be some pathways that tap into that works really well. If you have a certain, you know, if that works, you have a peak state that probably is what might drive that, you know, expression of I want to move, or, you know, do the exercise. Or
I need this one.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I'd be interested.
Does
anyone have any thoughts? I mean, do you have any thoughts, Kirsten, on what peak state that might be about the CO2-O2 balance?
Actually,
I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, no, but this is total preliminary data, but we do believe that there is something going on there as to metabolism. And so I think the sensing of, I don't know, don't you also experience sometimes that breathing is really, I mean, it's like the breath length and everything is effortless and it's just in balance. And then other times, if you're under stress, there's like a holding a breath, or, you know, that something is out of sync. So when it's optimal and it's working, I think a pathway of some sort is just absolutely working perfectly.
And also, most people are breathing from here only, not from the belly.
And when you feel a certain thing, it's like breathing becomes like your air, that your body is air. And I believe that something there is working absolutely perfect.
Julie, what was your experience with the breathing?
Yeah, I did it and I had that experience, but you know, I'm one of the people who struggles to complete processes. So I get so far and then I kind of lose interest and, you know, get on to something else. So I keep meaning to get back to it because it's a fairly simple process to do. It just takes time. It takes, you know, several weeks, months to build up the capacity. But you know, you can heal all illnesses. You can have transcendent states. You get peak states. You know, it's another pathway into the peak state stuff.
Do you know, Julie, if, I mean, so that's of interest. We're always interested in other processes that trigger peak states. Is it like we were talking about yesterday? Is it something that you have to keep doing to maintain it, or once people get there, it's stable? Do you know about that?
I think you have to keep doing it. I think.
Do you have a reference for what you're talking about?
Yeah, I can
That'd be
send
great.
information to anybody who wants it, because I think it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think peak states are always interesting.
Yeah, definitely. But is it that the other thing that I spoke about was just the yoga practices, the pranayama and chanting practices that Sadhguru recommends, and how beneficial they are and quick. Because
so you don't have to go to the ashram to do that?
Nope. No. Yeah, no, you know, most big cities have somebody who teaches it. It's like a 4-day course. But, you know, I always talk about the things that worked for me, because things are quite a struggle for me. So if it works for me, I think it'll work for most people. I think there's still a couple of questions on there, Shayne.
There is.
Quite a few.
No, we're not going to get through them all. There were a few people have asked a question for you, Grant, as a follow-up from yesterday. You made a statement around that there's a dominant message that we're consistently receiving from Gaia, and it's a good idea for us to work on our energy. And they're asking you to expand on that a little bit more.
Well, it was a surprise to me too. And before I answer it, I just want to say some of the other speakers, Jola or Gaetan, or I'd love to hear more about what you thought about the conference and what you learned, or questions that came up for you. So just to quickly answer that last question, imagine that everybody's getting a message that you have to change, you have to do something, and everybody's slamming the brake on as hard as possible so they don't have to listen to this. And then they want to listen to Gaia stuff, and they're pushing the accelerator pedal to here. So they got two things going on at once. And I think that's part of the dilemma of listening to Gaia, is that we're trying to not listen as hard as possible because we don't want to do what it's saying, basically. Okay, I think that's as far as I can go.
I can agree 100% with that. That was my experience, like for those past, for 1 month, I mean, wanting to hear Gaia and at the same time breaking, like, no, I don't want to be controlled or to do what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, because hearing Gaia isn't just chatting to your uncle or your aunt. Gaia tells you at a biological level what to do, right? It isn't instructions, it's this, do this, yeah, like make your arm go up or make your arm go down. It's very physiological. So if you're trying to block that because you don't want to be controlled, you're in trouble here with trying to communicate with it.
Awesome. To switch topics, you asked me what I liked about this symposium, or what I learned. And one thing that I really liked is the community and the connection we created with other people, because we as I talked about it actually at the beginning, we're trying to create a unified model that explains a lot of things and to explain data that are seemingly contradictory. For example, hardcore material medical things with spiritual things as we've been talking about. And it is my sense that it's actually what we should be doing, to reconcile everything and to help people who think that there are conflicts between those models take a step back and see that there is a broader explanation. And somebody was mentioning transpersonal psychology and saying, oh, what you talk about seems very in tune with what we learn in transpersonal psychology. And no wonder, because it's one of our sources of inspiration. People are interested in meditation. We've been talking about yoga and pranayama. And for me, that's really nice to see that everything can be coming together and that we can learn from each other and build something that will be bigger if we dare to sometimes question or understanding. And that's what I've seen happening in this symposium this year. So I'm really, really happy about that. And I wonder if people have the same feeling or the same impression, or because we know our stuff, but learning to Emma and to Kate was really, nurturing. What do you think? Someone says, yes, I love the community. That's great.
Yes, I love this community. I agree, Gaetan.
It's just nice to hang out, and talk about things that you cannot really talk about with normal people.
I can add that it's demanding to speak about the issues with the thing that I'm speaking about, the issues which can trigger somebody else who's listening to my presentation. On the other hand, this is amazing feeling that I can give an information how we can help these people. So this information has two sides, both sides. It's demanding, but it's giving amazing satisfaction.
And now, thanks to you, they are aware of that. So maybe it's a shock for some people, but then they remember what you said, and they know there is a solution to their issue, the way they experience things. So that's also the goal of this symposium, to make them aware that you experience that. Yes, we have an explanation, but also often we have a solution for you. Just don't believe us, just try it. And yeah.
I have a question here that maybe Mary and Kirsten could respond to. So Christian was asking, they'd like to ask about psychoimmunology approach when it comes to solving physical damages. So for example, Grant, you were talking about this in your COVID discussion about finding lung organelles. So are there organelles for every part of the body? Could we actually end up with helping smokers with their lung damage, or bones, or hair loss, or eyesight, and other stuff like that?
So Mary, do you want to go on that one, or should I say a little?
You can go first.
So just
and I'll follow up.
Quickly. So when you're, as Amala says, your awareness is in the primary cell and it directs the whole body. That means that there are actually corresponding to the different places in your body. So say the lungs, there are physical structures in the primary cell that, if they're working optimally, that should correspond to your lungs working optimally. So in our model, that should be possible to make a tissue more resilient to diseases. Yes. So Mary, you can take it from there.
I think, there's a number of things going on here. Certainly in the early days, we were on the trail of RPH. What are we calling that now? Regenerative physical healing. So we know that is possible, and that there's I believe, a peak state where not only can you do that for yourself, but then assist other people. We're not there yet, unless our research directors are keeping me in the dark. But the thing I was talking about yesterday is that my new hypothesis that we really haven't tested, and this really comes from the little bit of work we did around traumatic brain injury when we made this discovery, that there was actually, interestingly, a fungal organism both in the block connected, and that's what and in the COA, the blob that we were talking about earlier, that when we cleared that out, we got the same sort of look in the brain, that it looked transparent and expanded, which was our endpoint with our old TBI process, and that we would call, okay, we were changing the resiliency of the brain. And then that resulted in the present. So this was something, a developmental event we were working at in the past, or the client was working on. And then in the present, what happened experientially for them is that their traumatic brain injury signs and symptoms, signs being something or experience like a headache, or symptoms, brain fog, would either greatly decrease or go away. We think if they just greatly decrease, they didn't complete the process. Now, as I said all along, we don't know what was actually physically happening in the brain. So if we had someone we were using the TBI process on, and had a brain scan or an MRI, something like that, what that looks like before and after. So from what's physically changing, I don't know, we don't know. And that would be, so if we're actually like, let's say someone had a stroke, and we haven't tried the TBI process on stroke, so we don't know the effect. But let's say someone had a stroke, and you could find on a scan a big part of the brain was damaged. You could tell that from the scan. So it seems like one of the implications you're asking is, if there's a brain organelle, have we found that? Is there a brain organelle in the primary cell? Do we know?
The nucleus
Yes,
corresponds.
Not a separate one.
No.
Not as far as we know.
Yeah. So whether that's different from other organs, I don't know. But whether just clearing out the funguses we were seeing, like in the TBI process, whether that would change in a stroke, and whether it then opens up the body's ability to heal itself because you're getting this pathogen out of the way. That's one of the things that we need to investigate, in kind of a hypothesis I have. And then the same thing goes with other tissues. Does most other tissue just have these endemic fungal organisms at a level, obviously, that they're not, we're not able to pick up on physical scans in any way, because it's just always there in the background. We haven't known to look for it. And is that something that makes a person susceptible to illness at whatever level, and that people that are more susceptible to illness, or when they get an illness, it's worse, that they have more of this pathogen? Again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying it's a hypothesis, and we need to explore. And I don't know, Christian, did I answer your question at all? Or did Kirsten and I answer it?
I think that's a pretty good response.
Thank you.
So we're already more than 20 minutes over time. So I think it's probably time to start to bring it to a close. So I guess time for anyone to say any final words that they want to say before we close this year's research symposium.
Hey, this was a ton of fun. Let's do it again next year.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, Julien. Yeah, it goes a bit in the same direction that was Gaetan was saying before, and I think in this symposium, again, it shows the way we can go. Like we started with some overview of our model and more scientific base of our model, and we went through all the application, and we finished with that spiritual emergency. I think it was absolutely perfect, and I think it was beautiful to talk a bit about soul and these kind of questions, because of course it's a fundamental question for all human beings, and this is also where we can meet, all of us, because even scientific people, I mean, at a point in their lives, they ask themselves those questions. And I don't know who was talking about, Emma, she was talking about the fear and the stress. That is the main cause of our opening. And actually, this is what's happened to me when I was a scientist. I'm still a scientist, but I mean, I was not open at all to spiritual stuff. And when I had this diagnosis that I was probably sick, that finally was not true, but for a few days I was so scared. And that was the first experience I had. And we were talking also about what's happened when a loved one is dying. And this is the moment where people can open up to another dimension, more spiritual dimension. And to make the loop, after my scientific life, I went to a spiritual life, and for me, the peak state was exactly what was bringing everything together, answering my questions, helping me to heal all those experiences, the spiritual experience that could be really uncomfortable, even if there was also a beautiful part. But for me, peak state and our model and our techniques are really the answer, and the way we can put all of this together. So, yeah, I'm happy.
I agree. And me, it's the opposite. I started as spiritual, very spiritual, and then full biology, the model, and with the institute, the training I had, and now I'm like mix both of them, meeting them together, and so it's amazing.
Well, I'm sure Grant's going to have some final words at the end. So I really want to thank all of the presenters. I know this takes quite a bit of time. I was incredibly impressed how knowledgeable all of the presenters were in the topics that they presented on. Really impressive. And that's part of what makes it such a great community, and people that really care about making a difference to others, but also really smart, which is what we need to help us solve some of the problems that we have that we're trying to address from a humanity perspective. So thank you, everyone. Really want to thank all of the people who've been attending and who are following our work. We hope that it's making a difference, or at least piquing your curiosity to learn more. And we'll be exploring and whether this is the format that we continue. I'm really big on getting feedback. So for those that are watching, reach out, give us feedback around what worked and any ideas you have for us continually improving how these research symposiums are being delivered. Everything we do, we want to be client-centered. So those watching, you're our clients around these research symposiums. So we want to hear what actually works for you. And every year we do a training, every year we put on a research symposium, we want to be better than the last time we did it. So really look forward to the feedback as well. Grant, Kirsten, you want to make some final words before we go? No?
I would just like to say thank you to all the people who have listened in, and thanks to all the presenters.
Yeah.
Great.
Especially for the presenters who, I think, Jilly, you're moving, you're in the middle of moving, and you have had to take time for this. And Julien, you're actually in Central America traveling, and just each of you who had to sacrifice time and energy to make this happen. The beautiful slides that Jola made. Wow, I'm just so impressed by what everyone's been doing. And also I'm learning what's, as a teacher, I used to teach engineering. As a teacher, it's always such a blessing when your colleagues start to outstrip you and start to teach you stuff. And I come to these seminars now to learn what's happening in the different areas of the Institute. It's really such a blessing. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I want to thank Christian, Kurt, and Gaetan for the support they're giving in the background as well. We don't necessarily get to see that, but certainly makes my job a lot easier having lots of people in the background helping put the symposium on as well. So thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. So some of us might stick around to answer some of the questions that you've entered in the Q&A that we haven't got around to in the panel, although I think a lot of the ones remaining are either comments or questions for Emma, but there might be a couple more there that will do. There will be proceedings from a document that will be put up on the website once we get all of the presentations from everyone. Grant will get that up on the website. And at the moment, we've got Facebook Live videos up, but we'll be editing them and getting them on our YouTube channel as well. So helping get it out to a wider audience. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. See you next year.
See you next year. Ciao.